tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ Dhammaṃ Sanghaṃ Namasami. Today is the New Moon Observance Day. In the Buddhist calendar, we follow the cycle of the moon. So new moon, full moon, they're observance days where the Sangha come together to hear the recitation of the monks' rules. And lay people come together as well to meditate, chant, listen to the teachings. We listen to the Dhamma to help remind us of the path of practice that the Buddha gave us out of compassion and wisdom to help us understand better how to live in the world and free ourselves from suffering. Sometimes we need reminders. Sometimes we hear new information that helps. But the purpose of the Dhamma, whether it's talking about Dhamma or practicing it, is to help us get to the truth. So it's more, by getting to the truth, it helps us to understand where suffering comes from in our experience, and then what we can do about it to remove suffering from our experience. The truth is not always easy to swallow or easy to accept in life. Sometimes we half know the truth about ourselves or about our lives, things that are going on in our minds, what we've been saying and doing or thinking. But still, we don't like to fully admit it, so we sometimes suppress things or cover things over. Sometimes the truth is painful, like a medicine for a disease. Sometimes the medicine can be bitter or involve, the treatment for a disease might involve surgery or something painful. And the truth can be like that sometimes. When we hear the truth or we see the truth, we're waking up to the way things are. Sometimes it's hard to accept. It's not what we want to hear always. But nevertheless, the truth is what liberates us, so as a value. And so the Dhamma practice is helping us to bring our mind to see and know the truth. So one truth is that the Buddha pointed out, suffering always has a cause. In the Buddha's explanation for experiences of suffering, stress, pain, is that it has a cause. It comes from various causes and conditions that come together to bring us an experience of suffering. So it's not something that just floats in from the stratosphere. It's not random. It's not imposed. Ultimately speaking, it's not imposed on us by another person or a god. It has its own causes that we've created for ourselves. The teachers I used to live with used to say we came into this world voluntarily. We volunteered to be born. So any suffering we experience, we've already set up the causes and the conditions for that by wanting to be born. Why can we say we wanted to be born? Well, because from our past life we had built up all kinds of attachments, craving, attachment, becoming, which the Buddha pointed out are the causes of suffering. And when we finished with our last life, that causal process wasn't finished yet, still bearing fruit, so it pushed us on to seek more birth. So we wanted to be born. But as soon as you have a baby, a fetus and a baby, then you have a sensitive being, because this is a sensitive realm that we live in, and we experience both pleasure and pain, right from when we're in the womb, our mother's womb. And we volunteered for that because of our attachment. We came to be conceived and born, consciousness entered the fetus, and then we're born and we live in the world, and even birth itself is painful. Once you're born, there's a certain amount of pain and discomfort and different kinds of stress and suffering that we have to experience as a human being. It's the nature of the realm we live in, the nature of this world. It's not all pleasant. It's sometimes pleasant, but sometimes unpleasant. And our kind of cultural values these days, society, culture, tends towards seeking a way out of the painful experiences of life, or just accumulating more pleasant experiences, trying to minimize suffering, get away from it, suppress it, distract ourselves from it by seeking more pleasure, more power, more money, more wealth, hoping that somehow we can kind of outrun it. And that often works up to a point, so that kind of sustains the delusion, doesn't it? We tend to look at people who have a lot of wealth, power, money, and think, life must be easy for them. And of course there may be some aspects of their life that is easy, but they still have a human body. And whoever you are in this world, male, female, rich or poor, you have this body which is always going to bring you some painful experiences. You can't escape from that. And sometimes it brings you lots of pain, but always some pain. What's the cause for pain and suffering in life? Well, you could say is birth. What's the worst thing you can face in life is death. But where does death come from? Well, it comes from birth. Even in death has its cause. Because the nature of this body and the mind that depends on the body is it's a sankhara. It's a conditioned thing, a temporary thing. Comes into being and is constantly changing, aging, but also just changing, and the experiences we have with the body are changing. And eventually it heads towards its death from one form or another. And that's the truth of it, but we just don't want to think about that. Sounds depressing, boring, uninspiring to hear the fact that, we're subject to aging, sickness and death. Even just chanting it, people don't want to chant it sometimes. It's not nice to hear. It's not what we want. We want pleasure. We want beautiful things, beautiful experiences, things that will take us out of this body. So, the highest experiences of bliss, pleasure, it's often what we're looking for, hoping to keep one step ahead of suffering. But the Buddha's way was not to deny that there is pleasure and pleasant objects and pleasant experiences in this world, but to put them in perspective and say, well, they're temporary and they're unsatisfactory. They can't bring you ultimate peace, happiness. They can't fill your mind up to the point where you have no more suffering. They can do that temporarily, but not forever. And often they're very fleeting. And you just need to think back in your life to all the pleasant experiences you've had up until now. How long did each one last? It doesn't last very long. And often brings with it anxiety, because you have the worry that you'll lose it. Once you've got it, you're worried you're going to lose it, it won't last long. Or once you've lost it, you're worried that you're not going to get it back again. Life is often, or the experience of life in our mind is one flip-flopping between wanting, trying to get more, get better, and then worrying about losing it again, or having lost it, how to get back. And the mind is just not peaceful. So the Buddha was giving us a way to deal with that truth, how to live in the world wisely, carefully, and develop understanding which can actually free us from this whole cycle or problem of suffering in the mind that's never quite peaceful, never quite satisfied. He gave us this path, and we call it the Eightfold Noble Path, Sila, Samadhi, Panya, or Dana, Sila, Bhavana. We have different names for it, but it's a path of practice, of training, cultivating to bring up the qualities that will help us to recognize truth, understand it, accept it, and use that truth to liberate the heart, to liberate the mind from all its cravings and attachments, which are the cause of our suffering. So the whole flavour of the Buddhist path, they say, has one flavour. The Buddha said, just as the ocean, all the oceans and seas of the world have one flavour, salty. The flavour of the Buddhist path of practice has one flavour, and that is the flavour of liberation. Everything he was teaching and encouraging us to do is to help us liberate us from our own craving and attachment, so that we can experience true, deep, profound peace, long-lasting peace through understanding. So with this flavour of liberation, freeing the mind from craving and attachment, the Buddha encouraged us to practice generosity, kindness as a sort of foundation for our life. Looking at our personality, our character, and seeing where we can develop these qualities day by day, with the people we live with, or with strangers, and just the world around us. Coming to recognize the value of developing generosity, kindness in daily life, because it has a liberating effect on our heart. It's the direct opposite of developing the quality of accumulating things, accumulating material things, accumulating knowledge, which when done without wisdom and understanding, doesn't actually make us peaceful and happy, because we still are affected by craving and attachment. So just endless accumulation of, say, wealth or knowledge can actually heighten our experience of suffering sometimes, and certainly leads to disappointment when we realize it can't completely free us from suffering. And we spend a lot of time doing that in life, accumulating knowledge, and we go to school, educate ourselves, to getting ready to go out in the world and find some way to earn a living so we can survive. But unfortunately, a lot of that education is very limited. It's not really helping us to understand our mind and how suffering arises. It's more aimed at just gaining skills, knowledge that help us get a job, and we can provide services for the world and do things in the world, So it's not all wrong or bad, but it's just very, very limited. Because you may gain a lot of knowledge through your education, whatever kind of education you get in the world, but then you go off and you still have this experience of a mind that's not yet peaceful as you go to work, earn your living, earn your wealth. And often it's blinding us to the truth again. It becomes a basis for increasing our attachment to the world and increasing our delusion. So maybe better would be to, as we have families, we have children in this world, maybe to educate them in the world, in the ways of the world and what they need to learn, but at the same time educate them in the Dhamma. Bringing the taste of liberation to the school system, to the university system, or any kind of craft or skill that you're getting. Bringing the taste of liberation to that, as well as learning your skill, your knowledge, learning how to free your mind from attachment at the same time. That wouldn't be a bad thing. So we practice the practice of generosity, to let go of some of this habit we have of just always seeking to accumulate more wealth, more pleasures, more experiences, assuming that will get us out of our suffering and make us happy as human beings. We now go the other way and we say, well, accumulation on one level is good, is useful, because we need to eat, we need to live, but also developing a deeper happiness of letting go of some attachment. So we're not just seeing accumulation of wealth as an end in itself, more of a means to end an end, the means to support our practice on a deeper level. And so as we practice, as we live our lives accumulating wealth and finding different experiences to kind of nourish our attachment to the senses, then at the same time also practice letting go by practicing giving away, sharing, helping others, hand in hand, because it gives us a new look on the world. It says, oh, I can also be happy when I give away. Happiness isn't just about getting and accumulating, it also comes from giving away. And maybe the happiness that comes from giving away already is more nourishing to our mind and our sense of who we are, who we feel we are, than the happiness of gaining and getting. Certainly it provides you with some support through the ups and downs of life, because a life just devoted to gaining and getting is fraught with frustrations, because we don't always get what we want. We're not always successful in our search for wealth, for pleasant experiences. But if at the same time you're practicing generosity, it doesn't really matter because you're finding happiness even in giving away, letting go, giving up. So the Buddhist path is founded on the practice of kindness, generosity, with this taste of liberation, liberating us from the attachment, the coarsest kind of attachment to just grasping things as mine, trying to keep hold of them, which brings us a lot of stress and suffering. And realizing we can be happy and peaceful by letting go as well, by giving up, by sharing, by helping others. So sometimes they say the arahant, like Ajahn Chah used to say, I'm somebody who has nothing. Because it's peaceful. If you have nothing and you're satisfied, you're content with having nothing, you're going to be very peaceful, very happy. Or the Buddha himself, he didn't come into the world to accumulate pleasure or power or wealth. He came to practice to liberate his mind from suffering. So he didn't need all those external things to be happy. In fact, he said he was probably happier because he didn't have all those things to worry about. The more you've got, the more your attachments come up, the more you worry that you're going to lose it, or how to keep it, or how to make it, get more out of it. So the practice of generosity, kindness is always coming into our practice, whatever level. Even if you're meditating quietly on a retreat or in the forest somewhere, we still practice generosity of heart. There may be nobody around to practice or be generous or kind to, but you can still have a kind thought to others, send it out. The thought of goodwill, or the thought of forgiveness to oneself, because oneself is a person as well, and we often forget that. And we carry on a lot of negative thoughts about ourselves, attached to our past experiences, some of them not so good, our failures, mistakes. So sometimes we need to forgive ourselves. You might be meditating all on your own quietly, or just doing something quietly on your own, and the thought of the past comes up and makes you feel sad or even angry with yourself. But that's another form of giving, the giving of forgiveness. Accepting your past mistakes and what you've done, or accepting what others have done and forgiving them rather than holding on with anger. It's another form of generosity. It cleans your mind out a little bit. A little bit of the mental baggage is put down. You hear a lot about the practice of letting go. Suffering is caused by attachment, so we practice letting go of attachment to end our suffering. Very close to the word letting go is the word putting down. There's another way of looking at it. As we go through our life, we fill our mind up with all kinds of attachment, mental baggage, and it gets heavier the longer we go on. And whether we do attain a lot of wealth, power, fame and fortune, or not so much, this inner attachment, the mental baggage we accumulate can be just as big, just as weighing down on us just as heavily as for someone who doesn't have a lot or someone who does have a lot. Basically, it comes through ignorance and misunderstanding of the truth. As we go along through our life, we tend to collect a lot of mental baggage and hold on to some of the painful experiences we have. We remember, we keep going over them over and over again. So the practice of forgiveness helps us to accept and then to let go, to put things down. And the mind feels a little bit lighter from that. Every moment you're aware of, say, a memory, a negative memory, or a negative perception about yourself or about someone else. But then you consciously put it down, let it go, give it up, and the mind feels better for it. And alternatively, when we hold on to our negative perceptions and memories, the mind feels heavier. It's like walking anywhere. If you keep adding to your load, your physical load, you start to get weighed down and you can't walk so fast, and after a while, maybe you can't walk at all. And life is a bit like that. If we keep compounding our despair and suffering by holding on to it in our mind, remembering it, thinking about it, identifying with it, or we might say attaching to it, then it gets heavier and our experience of life gets worse. This is attachment. We attach to our views about ourselves and our perceptions. And the more negative they are, the more unhappy we'll feel. So when you notice that, recognize that and let it go, and you feel better. That's the generosity of forgiveness, giving up ill will towards oneself, ill will towards others. Building on a practice of generosity, kindness, forgiveness. And the Buddha said, the more you do this, then you get this sense of well-being arising as even when you do make mistakes or things go wrong in your life, you can let go with understanding, with acceptance, with knowledge, with understanding. You can really free your mind from some suffering as you do this consciously. And sometimes the truth is hard to accept. We don't like to admit we've made mistakes or failed in something, or some part of our life went wrong. But when we can open up to it and be a bit more aware, it can be a very cleansing process. It lightens up the mind, allows us, frees the mind, liberates the mind. Ajahn Chah, my teacher, used to say, sometimes we have to cultivate the earthworm mentality. The way of the world is one of accumulation, gaining, so it's all about being confident, going out there, getting what you want, being, not letting anyone or anything get in your way, and consequently we get a lot of stress from that. Sometimes we have to step back and accept the earthworm view of the world. We have to humble ourselves and accept we're not perfect and we're not fully wise to the world yet. But that's a sort of liberating perception, isn't it? If you look at yourself like an earthworm in the ground, low down there, not something that's very attractive to the world, doesn't seem to be much use to the world on the surface. It's a good starting point for practicing the Dhamma. Then you can really get to the truth of things. If you start from a very high place, I'm good, I'm perfect, I'm the best, very difficult to teach yourself or learn how to let go or liberate yourself from your attachments. If you think about it, earthworms actually do a lot for the world. They fertilize the ground, bring in air, they oxygenate the earth, and they bring in nutrition. If you ask any gardener, they'll say, earthworms are quite good. And that's like somebody practicing the Dhamma. They might have, their starting point might be actually forgiving themselves and recognizing their faults, their weaknesses, their attachments, where problems have come up and where they've caused themselves suffering or even other people suffering. But they accept that with humility, so then they can move on and grow from that starting point of truth. It's like receiving the Dhamma, just listening to Dhamma talks. If you think you know already, then there's not much space in your mind left to receive new information or new ideas. So cultivating a bit of humility, the earthworm mentality, is a good way to start the practice. They say sometimes the old Zen monks in China, they used to really value humility. So when they meet on the road, meet another monk walking the opposite direction, they bring up their hands in Anjali. They go like this to meet the other monk, and then they have to keep their head a little bit lower than the other monk. So the other monk also might value humility, so they keep their head down, and then you keep your head down and they keep their head down. So you might get two monks meeting each other, basically lying on the ground like an earthworm. Valuing the role humility plays as a sort of an educating factor in our mind. When you're humble, then good things can arise from that, like fertile soil, good things can grow in it. It's the opposite, they say, of the village dogs meet, and they always got their heads up and their tails up and they're very proud, but then they're always getting into fights, competing with each other, and have a lot of suffering. Or sometimes the monks, they would verbalize it, and they say, "Oh, Venerable Sir, I'm so pleased to meet you. Your esteemed self, you're such a good monk, I'm so happy to meet you." And the other monk, being humble, would say, No, you're the good monk. I'm so happy to meet you. You're such an esteemed venerable, so well practiced. I'm hopeless. I'm like a donkey. The other monk would say, No, I'm not esteemed and venerable. I'm like a pig. And they just start disparaging themselves to bring up this humility again. So whether it's done through action or through verbalization, the idea is to bring your conceit, your arrogance right down to ground level. Because from ground level you can only go up, you can only learn and grow and improve. So it's like letting go as a practice, putting things down, putting your mental baggage of who you think you are, whether you think you're good or bad, doesn't matter. You're putting it down, starting at base. The part of the practice the Buddha encouraged that we call sila, learning to live in an ethical way or a harmless way, requires this as well, setting aside some of the worst excesses of the sense of self, our conceit, our pride, our arrogance, which leads us to harm others so often. The way we talk, the way we act can lead us to be violent or abusive to others, look down on others, exploit, harm others through our behavior, or take their property, or just act in ways that are harmful to ourselves or others. Also requires this putting down, setting aside of certain mental qualities that cause us suffering, cause others suffering. It requires us to forgive others, because if sometimes others don't behave well, but we're training ourselves in, say, non-violence, harmless behavior, we have to put up with that. Sometimes the way in the world is if someone behaves badly, well, you go and attack them in one way or other, either verbally, physically, or at least mentally, seek revenge on them, harm them. Well, the Buddha encouraged us to be patient, mindful, and not to enact our thoughts to harm others. So to be composed in our speech, careful in our speech, careful in our actions, which takes a lot of effort. Sometimes people mistake it. They think, oh, this is just being passive, not standing up for yourself, not protecting yourself. But it takes a great effort to be patient with someone who's difficult or aggressive. But with that patience and then restraining the worst excesses of your behavior, what it releases some space in your mind to think things through and maybe solve the problem in a more peaceful, more effective way. The Buddha didn't encourage us just to react to things all the time, following our moods of pleasure-seeking or aversion, following our attachments to opinions and views and what we think is right. He encouraged us to consider things wisely. As we practice trying to live in a harmless way, it requires wise consideration, mindfulness, awareness. Then we can consider what is the best response. But to do that, you have to be patient and learn to compose and restrain your behavior when you're with other people, especially if they're provocative or they're different from you and have different views, different behaviors. This is a training. It's not easy, but it's a training that, again, liberates the mind from all the feelings of regret and guilt from when we give in to our more negative emotions and we hurt others through our speech, our actions. It gives us some inner peace. But to do that, we have to, again, be very patient, humble, and aware of ourselves as we go through our life, because as we interact with others, we get lost very quickly. The attachment to the sense of self comes up, and we quickly can blame others for our own suffering and mistakenly think, oh, the way to solve it is by attacking someone or seeking revenge on them, verbally, physically. When the Buddha encouraged us to be more mindful and go deeper into the experience. Maybe we just have to be more patient and understanding. So the Buddha's path was encouraging us to go deeper into ourselves all the time, to see where attachments lie and how they come up in our thinking and then in our speech, our actions. How we identify with this body all the time as a self, and in our thoughts and memories as self, and how much trouble that causes us to really look at that And to look and watch and understand clearly, well, we have to develop the skills for that, which is why I encourage the development of mindfulness and put effort into developing awareness, mindfulness of our own mind, what lies behind our actions. To see that there is such a thing as a wholesome state of mind and an unwholesome state of mind. And that wholesome mental states or skillful mental states, whatever way you want to describe them, they arise in our own mind. Unwholesome or unskillful mental states arise in our own mind. Unskillful mental states are all the thoughts and intentions rooted in greed, anger, delusion. They arise in our own mind, even though our experience of the world can provoke us into a thought of greed or anger or delusion. Those thoughts are actually arising in our own mind. But similarly, a skillful thought arises in this mind that we have, a thought of non-greed, non-anger, non-delusion. So there's these two things we're learning to recognize and promote the skillful and abandon the unskillful. This is what we call the practice of right effort. And to do that we need mindfulness, the ability to look back at ourselves, develop the quality of a mirror. And sometimes when people were very deluded, the Buddha used to say, I'll be a mirror for them so they can see their deluded behavior. But really we're developing our own mirror, our own ability to look back at this mind and recognize what is wholesome, skillful and conducive to progress in our practice, and what is unskillful and just creating more suffering for ourselves, and then kind of like boiling water that bubbles over a pan. It bubbles out from our mind into our speech and our actions, and we end up hurting others if we don't do anything about our greed, anger and delusion. So the Buddha encouraged us to develop mindfulness every day and find time to develop it in a very formal way as well. Develop mindfulness in meditation, sitting, walking meditation, using meditation techniques such as the breath. Any meditation technique, the first aim is to develop awareness of your own mind, to be able to see or know your own mind in the present moment, so you can see what's going on. And like a mirror, a mirror doesn't judge you or have an opinion about you. It simply reflects what's there. This is the nature of mindfulness. You develop mindfulness with the breathing. You still have thoughts, intentions arising as you're doing that, but you're no longer acting or following them, you're watching them, so you can understand their true nature. And at first you're simply dividing the mind into the wholesome and the unwholesome. And you'll see the more you cling on to the negative, unwholesome mental states, the more you're suffering. They bring with them pain, discomfort, agitation. They're not pleasant. And a mirror reflects that, just as it reflects everything that comes into, the light that reflects on the mirror will show every detail of a person's face or their clothes or whatever it is that's coming into the mirror. The mirror of the mind with mindfulness is highlighting the way things are. A thought rooted in greed, attachment, is not peaceful. Your mind doesn't feel content when greed is present, however small that greed is. It's not content when there's aversion. It's not content when there's delusion. Delusion is confusing. We're caught into misunderstanding truth, confusion, wrong views. The mirror of mindfulness highlights that. But it takes effort to keep that mirror there. It's like you look in a mirror once and you walk on. You only get a glimpse and you might see a couple of things and you miss most of what was in the image. And mindfulness is like that. Most of us give a bit of effort to developing mindfulness in our daily life, but it's fleeting and the effort maybe is not very sustained. So the knowledge we get from it, the understanding, is also limited. The Buddha was encouraging us to sustain our practice of mindfulness, supported by the practice of generosity, living in an ethical, virtuous way, then to cultivate and sustain the practice of mindfulness so that we can recognize unwholesome states of mind and begin abandoning them, letting them go, putting down that mental baggage, and cultivating the opposite, the wholesome, skillful ones that help us so much, bring us a sense of well-being and peace, and non-greed, non-anger, non-delusion. What the Buddha pointed out is that the human mind can do this if it's trained, if we put our effort into it. It can be done. He didn't teach us anything that is beyond our capacity as a human being. And since the time of the Buddha, many people have done this and benefited from it. One way the forest teachers I live with talk about the practices, they say, how quickly does someone put down an unwholesome mental state when it arises? And we all have to experience unwholesome mental states because we've lived in the world and accumulated all kinds of craving and attachment. So it brings out more of its fruit, more of its results, more negativity, more agitation, worry, fear, anxiety, attachment. That's normal. But how well do we cope with it? And this is how they sort of distinguish somebody who's practiced this path well or developed their mind well, is how quickly they abandon things and put them down. And we all have our strong attachments, so craving arises and we know it's something that's going to cause us some suffering or agitation, but we're still reluctant to put it down. Maybe we still have some wrong view there. We think, I should be angry, or this thing I'm attached to, it really will bring me some pleasure, even though part of the mind already knows the truth. It's not going to do the job, or the anger is only going to make you worse off. But the mind doesn't fully accept or recognize that yet. But somebody who's well practiced knows it immediately. This is suffering. This is to be abandoned. That's how they measure, the progress in the practice. I'm lucky. I've lived with some very good teachers who are very skilled in this. So sometimes, because you're a monk, they they give you little insights into their own practice or other people's practice. You get some good examples and ideas how things should go. I remember there's one teacher who is reputed to have great psychic ability and could see other people's minds. And because I knew him very well, he's talking about my teacher, Ajahn Kalyano, and he said, you see, that day Ajahn Kalyano was reading a newspaper, which you might think, that's something maybe monks don't need to read. And true, it's not an essential part of our life. But sometimes you need to know the news just to keep ahead. There's COVID in the world, there's this happening, that happening. Sometimes you need to keep aware of the basic, what's happening in society. So he was reading a newspaper. This other monk with great psychic powers was saying, Ajahn Kalyano doesn't read a newspaper like an ordinary person. An ordinary person absorbs into the newspaper all that information, the pictures, the words, the concepts, goes in and fills their mind up, and they might be full of even various emotions based on what they read. Makes them excited or angry or frustrated. And some people, when they read the newspaper, they get so upset they throw the newspaper to the ground or whatever. He said, but Ajahn Kalano's not like that. He reads a word and he puts it down immediately. The whole time he's reading the newspaper, he's just putting it down again. He's seeing the impermanence of it. He's seeing that it's not something to be attached to. His mind just knows that all the time. It's like somebody who's practiced this, getting to know their own mind and seeing it, what is wholesome, what is not, what is the cause of suffering, what is the end of suffering. Seeing the impermanent nature of mental states. When we say seeing impermanent or transient nature of mental states, it means you see the beginning and you see the end. Normally we're so deluded we don't see the end. We just pick up the next thought, the next worry, the next desire, and we run with it. And of course the end will come, but it's not like we're sitting, watching, seeing the end of it. We just run with it. And it ends when the karma ends, but that's not because of our own awareness. It's just because the karma finishes. But the one who's well practiced with the mind, they know the end as the beginning is happening. They also know the end. They see the transient nature of mental phenomena, of sense objects, of thoughts, ideas. So they don't become a burden to them. They're putting things down all the time. It's like picking up a newspaper but putting it down at the same time, which probably is not what the people who produce newspapers want to hear, because then you wouldn't sell many newspapers. But that's what it's like. You see something and you're putting it down. It's why monks aren't very good shoppers or consumers, because they're constantly seeing whatever you buy, it's already impermanent, it's put down. So you don't need to go out and do a lot of retail therapy, because you already know it's impermanent. Similar story was with Luang Por Liam, the same sort of thing. Another monk, also with great psychic powers and was able to see other people's minds. He was observing, there were two monks talking. There was a day when Luang Por Liam was up on the roof. When Ajahn Chah died, Luang Por Liam was on the roof building a new meditation hall because the old one was so small and run down, and Ajahn Chah died and they needed to build new facilities to host the funerals and all the events that happened after his death. So Luang Por Liam had to do a lot of work. And he never asked for help, he just went ahead and did it and accepted whatever help he got. And this day he was up on the roof, they're putting the tiles on the roof of the meditation hall, working all day long, tiring, hot. And he's quietly getting on with his work. And there were two monks on the ground, young monks, inexperienced in the practice, discussing this. They said, Luang Por Liam's always working. All he does is work. He doesn't even have time to meditate. We should really do more meditation. Perhaps we shouldn't be working, we should be off in our huts meditating, which is a very common thing you hear people say. And this monk was standing right behind them. They didn't realize, and he was able to read their minds. And he couldn't resist it. He just turned to them and he said, do you know Luang Por Liam's mind up there doing that work is in samadhi, and it's peaceful. It's not agitated. He's mindful. You two are down here discussing this whole scene, and your minds are completely overwhelmed by your own thoughts and attachments. The two monks sort of looked embarrassed. Oh, okay, it's like that, isn't it? Sometimes what's going on the inside doesn't necessarily show up on the outside. So learning to train yourself to watch your mind, you're learning to see a wholesome thought as a wholesome thought, an unwholesome thought as an unwholesome thought. Understanding an unwholesome thought leads to suffering, therefore it should be abandoned, put down. You're training yourself to accept that truth, rather than trying to justify your unwholesome thoughts, find excuses for them, or fall into more despair. Oh, I've got so many negative thoughts and stressful thoughts, I'm hopeless. It doesn't help, it only makes it worse. You're actually aiming to cut through the attachment, just get to the point where you know your mind and you can see things as they are. A wholesome thought is wholesome, an unwholesome thought is unwholesome. Learning to consider what's going on in your mind, being able to pay attention and consider so that you can do the right thing. Yeah, of course, it's not an easy practice, but it's the way that leads to the liberation, freedom from suffering, which is what we all want. Letting go of attachment. And on the very deepest level, and we can all do this. Sometimes you're stuck in a mood, just having enough awareness to take a few deep breaths as you're experiencing that stress or that anger or that worry or that desire can give you great insight. Just taking 3 deep breaths. Interrupting the train of thought, seeing the impermanence of thought. As you take a deep breath, your attention comes to your breath, doesn't it? You're interrupting undermining the power of those negative thoughts, at least seeing them as less powerful, less real than before. You may stop them altogether, or at least it just interrupts them enough to you see, it's just thinking, isn't it? It's just a negative thought. I don't really need to run with it, or believe in it, or hold on to it. Ajahn Chah, I'm giving you the soft option. Ajahn Chah went all the way. He said, if you won't stop thinking those angry thoughts, worried thoughts, greedy thoughts, just stop breathing altogether. Hold your breath. And the fear of death will bring your mind right back to the present moment, and you'll see those thoughts are just trains of thought. They're what we call sankhara, mental formations. And you don't have to run with them and follow them and believe them. You can just let them go. Fear of death will bring your mind right to the breath, and it will cut through whatever the issue was that was bothering you, and then you'll be saying, when are you going to let me breathe again? To yourself. But you get the idea. Your experience of stress in your mind can be cut through, can be abandoned, let go of. You have to learn how to recognize it though, and then start to undermine it. Bringing up a skillful reflection, bringing up mindfulness, and then reflecting, these things are impermanent, they're just thoughts. And what do thoughts do? What is the duty of a thought? The duty of a thought is to arise and pass away. And just think how many stressful moods and experiences you've been in since you were born. How much of this mental baggage you've carried along, and it's brought you different kinds of pain and frustration and disappointments. And where's that all now? It's all gone, isn't it? It arose and it passed away. So next time it's arising, just save yourself the bother. This is going to pass away as well. I'm not going to bother thinking like this. Certainly not acting on it or speaking on it, and just let it go. So the flavor of our practice is one of putting things down, letting go of attachment on the level of the practice of generosity and kindness in daily life, learning to live harmlessly with the people around us, and developing mindfulness and the patience and the effort to train your own mind, whether you're with other people or not. In the end, our mind is our best friend or it's our worst enemy. So try to look after it well, treat it well. If we neglect it, then we can have a lifetime of suffering, and unnecessary suffering at that. And you neglect it, things tend to get out of hand, get worse. We get stuck in ruts, or we get stuck in habits of thinking that just keep coming up over and over again. If we don't bring up the mirror of mindfulness and reflect on them, look at them as they are, the truth remains covered over. And so those kinds of suffering just keep getting us over and over again, and maybe get worse as well. The liberated mind is one that sees things the way they are, sees a thought as just a thought, and it arises and passes away. I had one friend who went off on retreat in a cave. A monk went off to sit in a cave, and he was so frustrated with his mind, just endlessly creating stress out of nothing. First off, he realized he couldn't blame anyone because he was totally alone in a cave. So he couldn't blame anyone for his stress because there was no one there giving him a hard time, bullying him, tempting him, leading him astray. There was no one. Only had his self to blame. So he got that realization quite quickly. But still he had a lot of moods and thoughts coming up over and over again. And he couldn't keep his mind on the breath. The power of all his mental activity was far too strong for that. So the breath was like, just always eluding him. So he got really frustrated. But then he hit on a new method. He thought, I can't stay with the breath, but what do I know? Well, what I know is that my thoughts, they arise and pass away all day long. Sitting in a cave, what have you got to distract you? Nothing. You're just watching your thoughts. Whether you're sitting, walking, whatever you're doing, you're with your thoughts, because there was no other distraction. And he said, but I can see every thought arises, passes away. They're all just fading into nothing over and over again. However annoying they are, disturbing they are, they just fade into nothing. So I'm just going to focus on that bit of nothing at the end of the thought. So you have the beginning of the thought, which sometimes is exciting and fascinating, and then sometimes it's boring, and sometimes it's just downright miserable. But I'm not going to go for that, judging them on the quality of the thought, what kind of thought it is. I'm just going to watch every thought fade into nothingness and become really mindful of that as a practice. And he'd never done it before, but he started doing it. And he said he got real good results, just seeing every thought just go to nothingness, go to nothingness. So he got to the point where as soon as his mind is picking up the next idea, the next sense impression, he's already focusing on nothingness. And he said he got really peaceful just seeing everything is just arising and ceasing. That's the way it is. Feelings in the body, mental feelings and emotions, thoughts and memories, they arise, they pass away. He just kept seeing cessation, cessation, ending, ending, nothingness, nothingness. He said after a while his mind just became so peaceful, nothing could bother it, because he's just with nothing, but the nothingness of the mindful, clear mind. He used a bit of a comparison, maybe not the best for a Buddhist monk, but he said it's like when you put a candle on at night in the forest, and unfortunately there's a lot of bugs around, and when they see the light, they're kind of automatically attracted to light, so they'll just fly into the flame of the candle, and unfortunately they'll die because they get burnt. So often monks will cover their candle up with glass, or they just won't use candles because so many flies or bugs are getting burnt. But nevertheless, you got the image. You have a candle and every little winged creature or moth or fly in the night sky flies into it and dies, flies into it and dies, over and over again. He said it was like that. There was the brightness of mindfulness and awareness of impermanence and understanding the impermanent nature of his thoughts. So every thought was just like another fly flying into the candle flame and just dying there, ending there. Nothing could disturb him once he practiced to a point where it was just sustained. It was just clear to him, oh, everything is impermanent. Every sensation, every feeling, every thought. He said he had the best period of meditation he'd ever had, by simply focusing on the ending of every bit of his mental experience as he was going through his day. He said he became very peaceful. As an idea, it doesn't sound attractive. You're just focusing on the ending of things, because your desire wants you to focus on the beginning of things, getting something, having something, experiencing something. That will make me happy, I'll feel better, that's good, that's what I want. It's the opposite of that, and yet it brought a much more sustained kind of peace and contentment. Just saying, everything is impermanent. What arises ceases. I don't need to run after every thought. I don't need to react to every feeling of pleasure and pain. I'm just watching that it arises and ceases. You might say that's when mindfulness and wisdom become very strong, working together, looking after the peace of the mind. So the mind becomes very bright and happy like that. It's not bothered by anything. It doesn't mean to say you have no more experience in life. You enter some black hole or some void. You're still living your life, and you're still a living, breathing, conscious human being, and you still have your senses, so you do still experience pleasure and pain. But the mind is not grasping or attaching to it or building up suffering around these experiences. It's just knowing things arise, things pass away. It's like someone getting skilled in putting things down. The majority of people in the world are skilled in picking things up. That's why we keep suffering. We keep getting involved, keep picking things up, keep thinking, keep desiring, keep wanting, and so we're always dissatisfied, discontent, on and on through our life. But the wise person puts things down. Whatever comes up, it's impermanent. It's to be put down anyway, because in its nature it's impermanent. You might as well just put it down rather than grasp at it, because it's going to leave you anyway. So your mind merges with wisdom. You see, that's the way things are. It's to be put down, not to be picked up and grasped, but it's to be put down. It's a better way for the mind. It's peaceful, it's happy, but with knowing and with understanding. So tonight I've given you some reflections on the practice of Dhamma, the practice that is the path of liberation, letting go, putting things down, that the Buddha left us. He only left us it out of compassion. He had nothing to gain from teaching this. It was just out of compassion for anyone who's interested. This path exists, it's there, it's available for us to practice. Why not take it up and try it out? Anyway, for tonight, I'll leave the talk there and wish you all well. May you be happy and well and free from suffering.